and good evening to everyone. On behalf of the Office of the Global Engagement, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 6th webinar from the IRIS webinar series. My name is Richu George Philip, and I work as the Principal Program Administrator for IOE Initiatives at the Office of Global Engagement. From the Circular Economy Technology Cluster, the research initiative presented today is Low Carbon Lean Construction Technologies, led by Professor Manu Santhanam. Professor Manu is currently serving as the head of the department at Civil Engineering, IIT Madras. His research domain covers cement chemistry and multi-scale characterization of concrete, 3D printing of concrete structures, and use of supplementary cementing materials. He has been distinguished as a RILEM Fellow in 2019. We have Professor Ravindra Gettu joining us as a speaker today. Professor Ravindra is currently the Dean for Industrial Consultancy and Sponsored Research and the V.S. Raju Chair Professor at the Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Madras. He has co-authored close to 500 publications, of which more than 100 are peer-reviewed journal papers. He was honored for outstanding contributions at the Gettu Kodo Symposium on Advances in Science and Technology of Concrete, organized by the India chapter of the American Concrete Institute, Mumbai in 2018. He is the President and Fellow of RILEM, the International Union of Laboratories and Experts in Construction Materials, Structures and Systems, based in France. Joining Professor Ravindra on the panel is Professor Benny Raphael and Professor Ashwin Mahalingam. Professor Benny is a professor at the Building Technology and Construction Management Division of Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Madras. His core expertise is in computing and civil engineering, particularly in the use of optimization, data analytics, sensing, and control technologies to solve engineering problems in construction, infrastructure, and building systems. Professor Ashwin Mahalingam joined the faculty in the Building Technology and Construction Management Division of the Civil Engineering Department at IIT Madras in 2006. Professor Ashwin's research interests are in the areas of public-private partnerships in infrastructure planning and management, the management and governance of large engineering projects, and the use of technology in infrastructure development. Professor Ashwin is also a co-founder of Okapai Advisory Services Private Limited and serves as a director on the board. Joining us as a moderator today is Professor Mark Alexander. Professor Alexander is an emeritus professor of civil engineering and the senior research scholar in the University of Cape Town. He teaches and researches in cement and concrete materials engineering with experience in fundamental and applied research relating to design and construction. Professor Alexander is a past president of RILEM and president of the Concrete Society of Southern Africa for the period 2018 and 20. Thank you for joining us today, Professor Alexander. A small note to the participants, please use the Q&A to enter your questions and do upvote questions that interest you so that the moderator can prioritize them later on. Over to you, Professor Manu.
Thank you very much, Richu, for that introduction. And I welcome everybody to this webinar presentation on our Center for Low Carbon, Low Waste Construction. Let me just begin by sharing my presentation so that we can go right on it. Okay, hello and welcome once again. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world. And thank you all for joining this presentation of the research initiative on technologies for low carbon and lean construction. I'm Manu Santhanam, as Richu had explained previously, and I am heading this initiative. And along with a few of my colleagues, I'll bring to you the motivation, the goals, and the plans that we have in the center. And of course, Professor Mark Alexander, who's also a collaborator in the center, has kindly consented to moderate the ensuing discussion. And I'll be joined along with Professor Ashwin, Professor Benny, and Professor Ravindra in answering some of your questions that may arise from this presentation. We are a group of about 11 faculty members from the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Madras with expertise in construction materials, construction management, and building science. We have come together as a group primarily because we realize that a subject of this nature, which is multifaceted, needs to be looked at from various different angles, and we need to really provide solutions which are holistic and implementable overall. That's the reason for assembling this diverse team. And we are hoping that our contributions and our combined research efforts will lead to some really path-breaking discoveries and policies that will lead to the utilization of waste in construction. Just to put things in perspective, if one were to look at construction and demolition waste in India, you can clearly see that the numbers, which are actually unofficial because we really don't have a good way of capturing C&D waste records in the country. But even with rough estimates, we see that we are almost on par with the USA at the current moment and catching up with China with respect to the amount of waste that is getting generated. And with the rapid pace of infrastructure construction that is going on in the country currently, it is not too far that we will actually have a large amount of waste in our hands. We expect this problem to go up multifolds. Even looking at the demands of materials that go into making concrete, which is obviously the most widely used construction material in the world, and so in India, we know that a significant quantity of material is required. If you look at the numbers, sand demand is more than 750 million tons a year, whereas in reality, we really don't have any river sand to be used in concrete because much of the states in India ban the mining of river sand. We have to look for alternative approaches like crushing stone to really produce our fine aggregate. Stone is available in large quantities, but then again, the kind of geological disturbances that we're causing by mining need to be really thought about very carefully. Then, of course, the primary ingredient for making cement is limestone, and the quantity of limestone in our country is substantially large. However, much of this limestone reserve is in locations which cannot be mined. So we are really running out of good quality limestone stocks for even producing cement. Added to this, we also have waste from other industries and especially agriculture, which are getting dumped all over the place and really taking up a large portion of our useful land. So the problem of waste utilization in our country is really significant, and one has to really pay major attention to this. So with this background, we have come together to create this center, and here we intend to be the primary destination in India for all those who are interested in developing and implementing ideas on low carbon, lean construction technologies. We want to work on several different aspects which ultimately would lead to a sustainable construction. We hope to achieve this by developing India's first integrated test bed for evaluating the usage of agricultural, industrial, and C&D waste in concrete for directing practices, policies, and standards for waste reduction in the construction industry. So it's not just something that we are stopping with the use of materials as replacement for common ingredients in concrete, but we want to look at strategies which will bring about a proper implementation and help us really get through to the construction industry in a large way. One major aspect that we have in the center is that we are focusing on the use of technology for minimization of the waste, whether it be related to material or process. One of the examples, of course, is how can we leverage the benefits of additive manufacturing in construction and complement it with lean construction technologies such as building information modeling. So we are going to be using technology to show that we can utilize material effectively and process material effectively for the use in construction. Just to put our approach in a nutshell, we have, of course, on the one hand, the need for evaluating different types of materials and different types of waste generated by industry, by agriculture, and so on, and how best we can process it in order to be made into a useful construction product, value-added construction product, like rice husk ash or bagasse ash or C&D waste. These are just some examples. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of problems coming up with the use of or the lack of availability of good quality fine aggregate. So we need to look at several different industrial sources also. On the other hand, we also have the process-related waste, right? We have issues related to inventory, site operations. We also have issues related to processing of the material. And in order to put it all together in the most effective way and transport it to the job site locations, each and every stage of the construction process actually involves some level of wastage, which can be minimized if one were to look at the process holistically. The main approach, as I told you earlier about, is to use technology such as those we use in lean construction or in additive manufacturing to bring about an optimal way of utilization of these materials so that not only can we optimize the process, we can also frame policies that will ensure that these processes are leading to a sustainable construction. So overall, if you look at the cornerstone of our project, we use technology, we want to reuse and recycle materials. At the same time, we want to also focus on policies that will make it possible for the use of these materials in construction and not just leave it at the research realm. To explain further the details of how we intend to go about this approach, I now invite my colleague, Professor Ashwin Mahalinga.
Thank you very much, Professor Manu. So in order to accomplish the objectives of our center that Professor Manu just spoke about, we plan to take a multi-pronged approach. Right? We will define a series of problem statements relating to low carbon lean construction that we will do scientific research on. Some of this research will be analytical, some of it will be empirical, while some of it will be experimental. However, as Professor Manu was just mentioning, we do not want our center's activities to stop at conducting scientific research. We also hope to convert the outcomes of our research into technologies that practitioners can use in the field. We therefore also hope to enable a lab to market transition of our ideas. We also realize that in order for organizations to adopt these technologies, these new technologies, the management of these organizations needs to commit to changing their work practices. Business as usual will just not work. We therefore plan to work closely with companies in the infrastructure sector in an applied manner to help them to adopt these new technologies. And finally, we realize that in order to accomplish industry-wide change, we will also need to influence policy in this domain. So our center therefore also aims to advise upon and advocate policies relating to low carbon lean construction. So taken together, we plan to conduct scientific research, technology development, applied research, and policy development. And all of these activities will be centered around a systems thinking approach, which is critical to how we envision our center and which I will elaborate on a little bit in the next slide. Yeah, so we are all aware that in order for the construction industry to be truly sustainable, to be truly lean and low carbon, we'll need to do a number of things. We'll have to select sustainable materials to start with, but also we'll have to design in a minimalistic fashion. We'll have to construct as efficiently and as durably as possible, so we avoid repeated retrofits later. And when the structures that we build reach the ends of their lives, we should be able to seamlessly dismantle them, recycle and reuse the materials for new construction projects. So what you're seeing here on the screen is what people also call the circular economy or the cradle to cradle cycle. Our center will take a systemic approach and focus on all of these aspects. We believe that unless we holistically address the system as a whole, change is unlikely. In addition, we plan to focus not only on these various themes, but also on the interlinkages between them. So for instance, as we develop new ways of recycling waste materials, we also plan to pay attention to the economics of their supply chains and the feasibility of incorporating them in our designs. So this explains our system thinking focus at the center. In the next slides, I'll provide a slightly more in-depth understanding of specific projects that the center is likely to undertake. So we expect quite a bit of our scientific research to center around the recycling of raw materials. We are one of the leaders in materials research in India, and we hope to develop an integrated test bed that Professor Manu was also mentioning, where a variety of waste material from sites can be brought to our lab, to our test bed, where it will be processed, sorted, and treated through mechanical, chemical, and or digital means and converted into engineered products that can hopefully be reused in construction and infrastructure development. In the process, we hope to be able to study both the technical and economic feasibility of reusing a variety of waste material in construction projects. And this test bed will be the first of its kind in India. Can we move to the next slide, please? So that was from a basic scientific research perspective. From an applied perspective, we have long advocated the benefits of digitalization and automation in bringing about greater efficiencies in construction in order to make the industry low carbon and lean. As Professor Manu was mentioning, we were one of the first groups in the country to advocate the use of tools such as building information modeling to reduce waste and make construction more efficient and sustainable. Right? And we have helped catalyze India's 3D printing revolution. India's first 3D printed structures are on our campus, and we have worked closely with industry, technology providers, and startups to achieve this. So we plan to continue to work with these stakeholders, with industry, to increase the extent to which digital and automated technologies are adopted in practice in order to be able to procure, design, construct, and operate the built environment in a sustainable, lean, and low carbon manner. Right? So that's the kind of applied research that we hope to undertake. We go to the next slide, please. And finally, as mentioned earlier, we realize that capacity building and policy are critical to driving change at an industry level. So on the one hand, we hope to document a variety of case studies of low carbon lean construction in order to develop the teaching material of tomorrow as we train a new cohort of engineers who will be well aware of sustainable construction. We also plan to work with government organizations, professional bodies, and organizations that develop standards to come out with rules, norms, and standards that will help the industry as a whole move towards a low carbon future. We also plan to develop decision aids for policymakers. So for instance, a dashboard that can help track the flow of waste at a city or regional level can allow for reuse of waste material not only within, but also between projects. Finally, we realize that governments alone may not be able to effect these changes. We therefore plan to develop frameworks for private-public partnerships for low carbon lean construction. And of course, public-private partnerships are also an area that we have considerable expertise in within our group. So through our scientific, applied, and policy-oriented activities, we hope to contribute to both the theory and practice of low carbon lean construction and infrastructure development in India. I'll now turn it back to Professor Manu to discuss the potential impact of our center.
Thank you, Professor Ashwin. So as Dr. Ashwin was saying, we are adopting an approach that looks at various different strategies. But our long-term goal primarily is to not just to provide the perspective of creating useful resource from waste. That's obviously one of the major impacts that we would like to have. But primarily, how do we use these results to chart out the strategy for framing suitable policy frameworks that can help in the implementation of many of these strategies? Now, ultimately, much of the research does not make it in the industry primarily because the policies to utilize technologies such as this are not clearly available. Our aim is obviously sustainable construction, but to get there, it's not just enough to recycle or reuse materials. One has to have the policy in place to ensure that these materials actually get to be used in the right kind of construction projects. All of you obviously agree with me that recycling instead of landfilling can lead to multiple benefits. One obvious benefit is that it can reduce the amount of CO2 equivalent. Here, you can see on your screen some numbers that have been given for recycling a ton of C&D waste. You can clearly see that we can save about more than 6 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent by just avoiding landfilling and recycling 1 ton of C&D waste. We can save 90 megajoules of energy and quite a bit of arable land. So this is actually massive for developing economies, which really need to put several of their processes in place to ensure that we are able to take on this major challenge that is going to come to us in the future. Now, of course, the challenge has to be met with collaborators, and we hope to collaborate with people from all across the world. You can see the world map and the pins are showing the locations where we currently have potential collaborators that we have identified for our project, who are going to help us through in creating content for learning with respect to reuse and recycling and utilization of these technologies. And we are also hoping that we'll take up joint projects that can help in demonstrating how best we can reuse and recycle and create policies that can lead to the implementation of the waste management policies in construction practices. So I thank you all for joining us today and listening to our webinar on our center on this new research initiative. We hope that you'll continue looking at us throughout our journey in this process where we carry out the research studies that have been shown to you in this webinar presentation. You can follow our progress on the website that has been shown on your screen. That is linked to our main civil engineering department website. And we also have an email address where you can get in touch with us if you have any questions, if you have any specific ideas that you think that we should be working on, and where you could collaborate with us. We also welcome definitely more collaborators who can come with us and participate in this very interesting journey. I will now invite Professor Mark Alexander to moderate the question and answer session, and joining him will be my colleagues, Professor Ravindra Gettu and Professor Benny Raphael, who will help answer some of those questions. And we'll also take up more questions through the Q&A, where you are already filling up your questions. Please don't hesitate. Any questions, please do raise it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Thank you all once again. I'll stop sharing my screen now so that we can get on to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Professor Santhanam and your team, for putting this very exciting and interesting presentation together. And I think you ought to be congratulated at the outset for having shown exemplary leadership in regard to wanting to put this center in place. And I'm sure it's going to be extremely exciting and productive. I'm going to raise some questions with the panel. And as we've said, Q&A can also come in, and as far as we can, depending on the time, we'll pick up on those. And I want to do this under three main headings: internationalization, impact, and relevance. Of course, you've spoken about some of these things already, but let's unpack these themes a little bit more if we might. One of your aims here is to, or in creating this new initiative, is intended to allow you at IITM, and this team in particular, to participate at the highest level internationally. I wonder if you could give us some feel or sense for how IITM, your particular group in this case, compares in the international arena. Maybe I could ask Ravindra to come in on that question.
Thank you, Mark. So in terms of research publications, which is a metric or which are a set of metrics used to compare groups, we are doing very well in terms of all the indices such as H index, the field weighted citation impact, and so on. And when we compare ourselves with the top groups in the world who work in the areas that we are talking about today, we have a lot of collaboration with them. We have a lot of exchange of information. We sit at the same committees with them. So I'm very comfortable in saying that we compare with some of the best in the world. Benny, could you add something specifically on the areas that you work in?
I would like to state that we are well recognized in these areas of research, which are the focus of this center. For example, in the area of materials, we are the leaders, at least in India. We have a well-recognized group. And in the area of construction management, we are the pioneers in India. Most of the construction management programs in India were started by our alumni who did either master's or PhD here. And these programs were started using our program as a template. So we are well recognized in both materials as well as construction management. And I think, if you look at these two areas, we have held a lot of important positions, not only in India, but also abroad. For example, the faculty have been presidents and vice presidents of organizations like RILEM in materials and ISARC, automation and robotics. So we are quite well recognized, and this center will help us to take our research forward and help us to lead more interesting activities in this area.
Thank you, Ravindra and Benny. If I can continue along this theme more broadly, you showed a map of all the institutions around the world with whom you have links and with whom you intend to collaborate, a very impressive list of institutes that we saw there. How will you actually engage with those international collaborators? Give us some sense for how this is going to work.
Well, Mark, the funding that we have opens up a lot of new mechanisms, such as inviting young international faculty to spend periods up to 3 years with us. So we would have an opportunity for the best brains in the world to come collaborate with us. We would give them opportunities to carry out their research with maybe some teaching involved, but not much. We also want to send our students to other places. We want to engage with the top laboratories, top groups in the world, send our students, invite their students to come and stay with us. Now, we are also having international projects. I mentioned already that we have committees where we participate. We also want to have more symposia, webinars, and have discussion jointly on aspects that are relevant to this new initiative. Benny,
Thank you. Benny, do you want to add to that?
Yes, we were already working closely with many famous researchers in this area. We had close interaction, but we didn't have a formal arrangement for the collaboration. So this will provide a very formal arrangement, and there are, as Professor Gettu said, there are many possibilities. So we plan to engage our collaborators closely in this project. They will be able to spend more time on our campus. So we will be able to get their ideas. They will be able to look at what we are doing, give their opinion about it. And we will have joint publications. And of course, we will have student exchanges. So there are many possibilities which are thrown open by this Center of Excellence. And of course, we will be able to share intellectual property, and we'll have joint patents, technologies, and so on. So these are, we have very ambitious plans for our collaboration with our partners. And I'm very grateful that many of our collaborators have agreed to take part in this project. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It certainly is exciting to think about the possibility of bringing in fresh new minds, young minds with new ideas. I think you're going to have your hands full with just trying to contain all the new ideas that will come up. But that's a very exciting possibility. I've no doubt you'll manage to do that. Let's move on a little bit to impact. You indicate in your proposal that the work will proceed all the way from basic scientific research through technological development, ultimately through to the policy arena, which is correct, I believe. Give us some idea how you think this work will actually influence policy in the Indian context, specifically in view of the highly diffuse nature of the industry, which is common around the world. Could you give us a sense for how you really see this thing going through to, let's say, implementation and policy directives?
Well, Mark, we already sit in many committees and agencies which decide policy in the national, state, and regional level. We have already been participating in decisions that lead to new initiatives in housing and in infrastructure. So we strongly believe that that is certainly something that we can continue doing. We believe that this initiative, as you have rightly said, involves three main aspects: materials, technologies, and policy. We think that we cannot achieve what we want if we do not engage with policy, and we want to influence policy so that materials and technologies are used in the right way. Benny, you want to add anything?
Yeah. So to re-emphasize what Professor Gettu said, we also sit in committees such as the BIS standards, codes and standards committees, and also we closely work with organizations like the Indian Green Building Council, IGBC, who have a lot of the say in the policy matters. So I think we should also be able to demonstrate some of our technologies through our startups and our mentoring of the technology companies, which will convince some of these policymakers about the efficiency of our proposals. So there are many ways in which we will be able to influence policy through the activities of this center.
Thank you. If I can pursue this question a little more, obviously policy is one thing, regulatory frameworks is another one, and I don't necessarily want to go down the road of regulatory frameworks, but very often it seems to me that good ideas eventually spark into actual action when you can get a real sort of rollout in the industrial sphere. Do you have companies in India with whom you can work to put your ideas to good use. You obviously will have your own test beds. In a sense, you become your own prover of your own technology. But what about outside of IITM?
Well, Mark, we are fortunate. We have been fortunate to have industry partners. We can boast that we have worked with many construction material suppliers from all over the world. Larsen & Toubro, which is the largest construction company in India, has been a partner for more than almost 3 decades. So we have the possibility, and people listen to us when we provide new technologies. We have been able to try things out in the field. We are also very proud that a lot of trials with new materials and technologies have been done on our own campus. So people can come and see what they are working on. So this will certainly continue.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to add, in the automation sector also, we have been mentoring a lot of companies. For example, this 3D printing startup, which produced the first 3D printed building, concrete building in India. We mentored them. Similarly, we are also working with a lot of other startups in different areas related to automation. So these the technology demonstrations really help towards convincing people about the efficacy of some of the proposals we are working on. So I think, and also, our testbed laboratories setup, we are going to set up in the lab that will provide an opportunity for people to come and test some of their own technologies. So there are many opportunities provided by this center for widespread adoption of these technologies, which we believe in.
A very brief question to follow up there before we move on. Technology transfer. You want to transfer what you're doing to the industry. You're going to have students, they will produce theses, dissertations, you'll produce papers for the academic literature, which puts you among the leaders in the world. But there's not many practitioners who read papers, and certainly not theses. How will you get this technology transferred to industry? We've spoken about actual rollout, but in terms of knowledge transfer.
Well, Mark, one mechanism that we have is through consultancy. We have a lot of links which provide us consultancy that we provide to industry. As I mentioned, with Larsen & Toubro, almost 30 engineers from our master's program joined the company. So we have access to the leaders of this large construction company who are willing to lend a ear to what we say. Further, we sit on committees which involve construction companies, for example, through the Indian Concrete Institute. So there we develop guidelines which are sort of translations from scientific publications to publications that are more relevant to industry. So this is something we would like to continue to do, and we feel that we have done a good job until now.
No, that's very interesting, Ravindra. Thank you. This question of relevance, how relevant is this work going to be to the current situation in India in terms of economic and societal development, economic and societal growth? Just give us a sense for the relevance. Why is it needed now?
This is very relevant, Mark, because we have shortage of tens of millions of housing units. We have to build tens of thousands of kilometers of roads, and there is a shortage of labor. Even though we have a huge population, there is a shortage of labor. Later on, maybe Benny can comment on the skilling of the labor that could be possible through our center. So we feel that it's very relevant, and we need to construct a lot. That means there's going to be a lot of wastage from demolition and from the construction site. So we believe that if we do not do a good job at those places, we'll be accumulating a lot of wastage, bad practices, and maybe concrete structures that are not going to be durable, which is a big worry for us at this time.
Thank you. Benny, could you add there, please?
Yeah, and also we have a big problem with the waste. We see that landfills are getting filled up. A lot of waste gets dumped on the roadside. So it is a big societal problem. And one way to address this problem is to create demand for these material. so that, if this can be used in construction, we create the demand, and I think automatically this problem with waste will go away, because what we consider as waste today might be wealth for somebody. So that helps to avoid this societal problem related to waste. Now, coming back to what Professor Gettu mentioned about skilling and so on, we are trying to promote automation so that the processes can be improved. And one question which we hear very frequently whenever I talk about automation is, we have a huge labor, the huge manpower in this country. Why do you need automation? So we need to look at how people are being used in the construction industry. People are working in very inhumane conditions under sun and rain, and they are doing a lot of manual work which can easily be done by machines. Now, what we want to do with this is, develop technologies to make the system more efficient, but also put people away from these inhumane conditions, and put people more to operate machines in more technical jobs rather than manual work. I think that is another way, we improve the societal the sustainability. We cannot continue putting people in these kind of menial jobs. So we need to, this will be an opportunity to skill the workers, upgrade them, help them work in more respectable jobs.
Okay, that is very, very important. I'm going to ask one final question, and then just one or maybe two sentences, and I'll direct this to you, Ravindra. In a nutshell, why did you as a group decide to submit this application for this very exciting new center?
I think three reasons, Mark. One is we form a unique group which comprises of about 5 or 6 people working on construction materials, who look at making new materials, characterizing materials, and taking them into practice. And we have our colleagues, about 5 or 6 of them, who work in the area of construction management, in the area of automation and policy. And there are colleagues who work also on building physics. So this makes us sort of unique. I believe there are very few such groups in the world. Secondly, we have been working on these aspects. These are not new topics for many of us. So we wanted to come together to make an impact. Thirdly, we believe that the construction sector has to change. There has to be out-of-box thinking. So these are the three motivations or the reasons which led us to making this proposal, and we were lucky to get it funded.
Good. Thank you so much for those responses. Now, there's a large number of Q&A that have come in here, and I'm afraid it's not going to be possible to do justice to all of them. And I suppose in some senses by selecting now, I'm going to be unfair, but please put up with me. The team has undertaken to pick all of these questions up and respond to them as appropriate after the seminar. So you should be able to get some response. I'm going to go to a particular one here, which caught my eye, and these bounce around all the time. So I'll try. This is from Roberto Torrent, who's a good colleague from Argentina. He says, most of the partners seem to come from developed countries. Wouldn't the project benefit by involving institutions from developing countries that manage technologies more adequate for the Indian environment? Good question. Who would like to answer that?
Well, I can take that, Mark. First of all, thanks to Roberto for joining from Argentina or from Switzerland, where he may be. Well, we are linking up with a lot of South American countries, countries in Africa, and other places. So it is not that we are looking at the West in most cases. We are looking at collaborators who have the same concerns as us, who have done work that is complementary. So in a few weeks, actually, I'm traveling to South America. I'll be in Mexico, and I'm happy to say that one of Roberto's compatriots would be possibly joining the center soon to be with us for some time. So certainly we are not looking at only a few, but we're looking at more. The map that was shown was the collaborators that we had confirmed. We are looking certainly at more, and Roberto is a very good friend who can certainly suggest more collaborators to us.
Thank you. There are a lot of technical questions coming up, and I'm not going to try and put the technical questions, for example, how does this work? How does that work? That can come separately, but here's a more general question question about if you're going to use these new technologies, for example, 3D, using recycled materials in new construction, what will be the impact on the maintenance and the lifespan of these structures? I'm interpreting a question that has come from Alok Nachketa, but could you respond to that? Are we going to make another set of problems down the road?
Yeah, at the moment, these are research ideas. We are still working on, we are still developing proposals for that. So part of the research work will be actually the testing these technologies and having concrete data to answer questions like this. For example, how durable is this new form of construction? If you put a certain kind of waste material into construction, is it going to last? So these we don't know the answers right now. This is part of our research. At the end of our research, after testing, after experimentation, we'll have concrete data and we will be able to answer these questions.
Mark, if I may add to what Benny said.
Yes, please.
There are many things that we have seen which shows that waste is not bad to add to concrete. Since the question was about durability, I would give the example of fly ash. Fly ash used to be something that we throw away, in many places is still thrown away. But we know now that incorporating fly ash in concrete makes the concrete structure more durable in a chloride-rich environment. Similar things we could say for slag coming from blast furnaces. So there are cases where we already know. And in the other cases, like Benny said, we want to have a test bed where we can sort of plug in a waste and find out what the consequences of using that material are.
Right. I would endorse that, Ravindra. I think we must look at waste as a resource, not as a kind of a problem. It's a resource, and we have to turn it into resource-rich solutions. There's a general question here, which I'm going to interpret again, and that is from Girish Roy, in which this person really raises the fact that the industry at large is so far from this idea of sustainability that they're not in tune with it yet. So clearly there's going to be a huge problem in getting industry in sort of tuned into this whole approach. Could you comment on that as a challenge for yourselves?
Benny, you want to take that?
What exactly is the question?
It's just that according to this person, Girish Roy, they say that the industry is not at all sensitized to the issue of sustainability, reuse of materials, and they're not putting money into it to follow a sustainable path. That's a challenge. How will you get those members of the industry
I'd like to
involved?
mention that I work closely with the IGBC. I'm a member of the core committee of the Chennai chapter of IGBC. IGBC does a lot of work towards sensitization and promoting sustainability. So that is one possibility. And as we mentioned, there are other organizations also we work with closely. These are avenues for promoting some of these ideas.
Okay, right.
Mark, if I can just add to that.
Yes, please, Ashwin.
Very important question and needs to be addressed at multiple levels. I think this is where some of our policy advocacy work comes in, because we'll have to sort of redefine standards. We've got to see how governments and others can provide incentives for people to shift from what they are doing to the kinds of technologies that we are advocating, tax rebates. I mean, there are a number of interventions that we can think about. Simultaneously, we also have to look at capacity building at multiple levels. Of course, we want to now teach the new generation of engineers coming into the workforce that this is expected to be the way in which things are built. But at the same time, we have mid-career professionals at senior levels in organizations who we hope to bring to our campus as part of continuing education programs and so on, and try to see if we can change their mindset. So it's a complex question, but it has to be tackled in a multi-pronged manner.
Thank you, Ashwin. I think that's very important. I think that I've always said that as researchers and engineers, we can solve any technical problem because we're clever people. I mean, that's why we're engineers. But, it's at the level of the human interaction, of how we put these things into human systems and make them work. So you may just consider bringing in maybe a human resource specialist, a sociologist, somebody who understands how human systems work. It's just a thought which you might want to consider. I just want to maybe end off, because I see we're pretty well up time up here, and I'll hand back to Professor Santanam. But here is a comment from Rajendran Ramasamy, who says, this is really an exciting subject for our future industry. So here's somebody who's very excited. Thank you to all the professors who organized this webinar. While we're looking at new material and design methodology for future designs, do we have any idea or view on recycling existing building material waste, especially in India? Well, I think that's possibly been answered already in the seminar, unless Romana would like to add anything more. But thank you for that positive comment, Dr. Ramasamy. I'm sure that there are many on this webinar this afternoon who have been excited and inspired by what we've heard. Manu, can I hand back to you at this point?
Sure, Mark. Thank you very much for moderating this session. I know there's been a lot of questions raised. There are 52 questions still open in our Q&A box. Maybe I'll probably just prompt a couple of questions so that we are able to answer those before we leave.
Yes,
one is a question that was raised about how AI would be integrated into this approach to bring about a better sense of handling the low carbon and low waste sort of a construction project. Benny, would you like to comment on that? How do we intend to bring in
AI, machine learning, all that is very much part of our proposal. We are using these in many ways. For example, one of the proposal is to make use of computer vision to automatically segregate waste, and also robotic technologies for segregating waste. So these are some of the applications of AI and machine learning in our project. And of course, there are so many other things. We need to, once the research progresses, we will be able to release more information on some of these things. But at the moment, I just want to say that AI is very much a part of our proposal.
Thank you, Benny. Just one last question before we close. This question is coming from Jan Ulek from Purdue. Ashwin, can you handle this one? It says, can you comment on the model you envision for actively engaging the construction industry? For example, do you have an advisory panel? And if so, how do you select the members?
Thanks, Manu. So, yeah, with regards to the advisory panel, yes, we would have an advisory panel. And of course, the advisory panel would have industry participants. And we'd sort of like to look at selecting people who are both influential in the industry as well as people who are thought leaders who will help not only adopt these ideas quickly, but also help others adopt. But I think beyond the advisory board, which will practically have only a handful of people, I think there are a number of ways in which we plan to interact with industry. One is through a whole series of summer schools or winter schools or continuing education programs, webinars like this, where hopefully either via one-way or two-way communication, we are able to disseminate and receive comments on the work that we do. As Professor Ravindra was saying, projects and consulting is another way that we plan to interact with the industry. And in addition, what we would ideally like to do is also spawn startups coming out of this center who will essentially now be able to do more than just do the research and evangelize the findings, but actually implement some of these. So we hope to see companies coming out of this that will implement some of the tools that we develop. So I think there are a variety of ways in which we are planning to engage with industry. And as we go along, I think some of these will firm up and become a bit clearer.
Thank you, Ashwin. I don't know whether we have time or permission to go through the rest of the questions. Richu, how?
Take on a few more questions.
Yeah, sure. Now,
Manu,
of course,
you go ahead and moderate. I'm quite happy for you to moderate at this point.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I'll just pick up a couple of other questions. There's one question from Professor Frederick Bosch. So he's asking, what about reuse? Any interest in this alongside recycling? So we've been talking about recycling, and do we have strategies where we would like to reuse material? And what would be some examples that we can bring along from our center? Ravindra, would you like to?
Yeah. So certainly reuse is something that we would like. And prefabrication is a good way to look at it, because we can make elements. And if we think of the reuse right in the design stage, we can make elements that at the demolition stage can be removed and probably used in a new structure. Even though this is a concept that is not very prevalent in the construction industry, people have started thinking about it, and we would like to work along those lines.
Thank you. Now, of course, there's been
about financing. I don't know if you want to talk generally about the seed funding that we have and how we would like to.
Yeah, so I think the question was, how is the initiative being financed? So primarily, as Professor Ravindra was mentioning earlier, we are now part of this 68 research initiative groups that have been formulated in the institute. Once the institute was given this Institute of Eminence status. So the initial seed funding is basically an incentive to us to prove that we have an idea that can be put into practice to take our group on par with the best in the world. And we are hoping that we'll get there so that we can get the larger part of the funding from this group, from this initiative, that will help us put a lot of our thoughts into actual practice. And aside from this funding that is coming from the institute, we also hope to engage with funding agencies, not just in India, but across the world, to form larger research groups to get more proposals funded which are related to these areas of recycling. There's a lot of proposals from the participants in the Q&A box about using different types of waste materials in concrete, and how do we actually intend to use or assess the impact of the use of these materials is another question that has been raised very often. So I probably did not cover that in detail in my presentation. A lot of the emphasis is obviously going to be on a sustainability approach to assessing the use of these materials. So one can't just say that, okay, replace cement, that's going to make your concrete sustainable. One also has to assess the durability impact and also look at what would be the cost of putting the other material as a replacement for cement. So again, not just the cost in terms of the financial cost, but also the environmental cost. So one has to look at this from the complete perspective, and that's what we intend to do in the studies that we take up in the center.
Manu, we've been talking quite a lot about industry. There was one question that I'm sorry, I'm cutting in here, but
sure, no
from Leon Black at Leeds about the possibility of joint PhD programs. I've lost the question in detail, but it's there. Could you comment on the possibility of this initiative engaging in joint PhD programs?
The joint PhD programs, of course, are basically taken up at the level of the institute, and that's not something that is difficult because we have had this model with several different universities across the world. And this is something that we can put together quite easily, especially with respect to an initiative such as the one that we are proposing here. The project topics obviously will come out of these initiatives, but the joint degree programs are on the basis of MOUs signed between the universities. But again, that is something we'd love to work on.
Yeah. Thanks. I think that's important for the academic collaborators.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yes. We already have we can co-guide students with anybody across the world. It does not really need an MOU specifically for co-guiding. But yes, to provide a joint degree program, we need to go to the final step of creating that MOU.
Correct. Yes, that's true. Thank you. I'll leave it to you again, Manu.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Ashwin or Ravindra, would you like to answer any of the questions that are there?
There is something that maybe Benny or Ashwin would like to take from Jochen Teiser. He is quite interested with the presentation and asks, how about new construction equipment? Would we be working on new construction equipment, and then cross-funding opportunities possible with EU and other countries, and the time frame? Maybe between Benny and Ashwin, they could take it.
Yeah, Jochen is already our collaborator in this project. So to answer this question of new equipment, definitely we have been working on construction automation. We have created a few prototypes of new ways of construction. So that is the activity which we already are doing. And particularly in this project, we have focused more on 3D printing because we have invested quite a bit in it, and we are working with a startup company. So we have certain expertise in this area. So I would think, the more there will be more work related to the 3D printing with automation. So we might be able to come up with some new methods of construction, combining both robotics as well as 3D printing. That is as far as the new automation equipments are concerned. Maybe Ashwin can talk about the other parts.
Yeah, no, I think the canvas is broad, because as long as we are working on an intervention that makes the industry more efficient and sustainable, more low carbon and clean, then I think whether it is development of new machinery or whether it is development of new material or management practices, I think they all fall within our ambit. And in terms of collaboration, I think as Manu and others were saying, we have a little bit of money with which to invite a few people here, maybe fund a few postdocs and so on from other universities. But we are also very open to writing new grant proposals with our collaborators to try to come up with larger pots of funding to leverage both our strengths as well as yours to create meaningful interventions, not only for India, but abroad as well. So that way, the sky is the limit. And as long as we are doing something, like I said, to make the industry sort of more sustainable, more low carbon, lean, etc., what that is, I think, is something that we are willing to explore in a large sense.
There was a question about the time frame. I don't know if Manu touched upon it. Well, I can briefly answer. As Manu said, there are about 70 initiatives that have started off in the institute. They will be evaluated, including us, at the end of, say, 2 years some, and then the best performing institutes. So that's why we are pitching here, and we are looking for collaboration. The best performing projects will probably become larger centers, will receive further funding, and will be maybe even given space and so on. So we are talking about a short-term goal of showing that we are relevant, a mid-term goal where we can do larger things, where we are talking about things like the test bed, having a pilot plant, and so on, and then leveraging this to go on to the long term in terms of sustenance.
Thank you, Ravindra. I think, sorry, Mark.
Manu, maybe here's one final question that I could pick up on from the list. I don't know how it is in India, but I imagine it's very similar to the way it is here in South Africa. And that is that the profit margins on construction projects are usually very, very small. So the question here is, how will one ensure that these technologies are picked up where these profit margins are very small? Will there be significant cost and time benefits, or is one going to have to go more of a regulatory route to say, well, your new construction has to consist of at least this amount of recycled material using this kind of new technology? How do you see that? Maybe that's too futuristic a question, but it's one that we'll have to think about.
I can take that, or at least I can start with that. I think we believe that in the long term, these kinds of technologies should give us both benefits in terms of time, cost, quality, all of that. I mean, prefabricated technology, etc., should be able to give us those benefits. So in the long term, we actually believe that this will increase the profitability of the industry. But in the short term, there is always a learning curve that we have to climb over. And that's where regulatory support often becomes important. Right? So to set rules on the one hand that people will follow, but not just rules, but also to create incentives that makes it worth people's while to follow, so that you get to a point where you've institutionalized this practice within industry and it becomes the way it is done. At which point, even if you withdrew some of those regulations, you will still have industry running with these practices. So I think regulation has a role to play in the beginning, and that's where we have this policy focus. But going forward, hopefully we can institutionalize some of these practices so that it becomes the way things are done in construction, and that increases the profit margin overall. So that would be my response to that.
No, very good answer. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the 1 hour mark in this webinar. And since Richu has appeared on screen, I believe she's telling us that time is up.
No, that was not my intention. But
No, that's fine. It's fine. No issues.
Thank you, Professor Mark. Thank you to the entire panel. You've spent a lot of time answering all of their questions, and thank you to all of the participants. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you can all join us at the next webinar. And yeah,
I know that we have not answered some of the questions, so I still urge those who still want answers to some of the questions to kindly write to us at the email ID that I had shared previously, tlc2iitm@gmail.com. tlc2iitm@gmail.com.